So Michigan football currently stands 5-5, 10th in the Big Ten. But you know what's interesting about Michigan football is I'm confident I'm confident in them potentially beating Ohio State. And I know that sounds crazy because this is what's interesting is a lot of times when an upsets happen in the Michigan Ohio State rivalry, it's it happens and you're kind of like, okay, I could see that. Like 1995, Michigan did it. Ohio State, really good team, loaded with talent. But you're like, Michigan was still a good team. They had difference makers. I believe they had a young Charles Woodson, Tim Batuka, had a nice game running. This year, you look at Michigan football. Michigan football, you could say is underachieved, but you look at Michigan, like I've talked about ad nauseum, three true difference makers: Mason Graham, Colston Loveland, and Will Johnson. Hopefully, Will Johnson plays this weekend against Northwestern, and then hopefully, obviously, plays this weekend against Northwestern. He plays against Ohio State. But I would say, like, Michigan is double-digit favorites against Northwestern. Let's say they beat Northwestern handily. Now they go into the game 6-5. Let's say, obviously, still a couple weeks away. It's totally hypothetical because it's still, obviously a long shot for them to beat Ohio State. But let's say they did beat Ohio State. Then they're like, you go, okay, they still finished 7-5 on a very tough schedule. They didn't really beat, that was their only signature win, but you're like, okay, maybe this still was a very solid team. Maybe this just was kind of just an outlier down year. Maybe they're going to turn around next year. So, look, I'm not saying they're going to beat Ohio State, but I certainly can see them competing. And that's what you've seen. When these upsets happen, a lot of times it is a team has true difference makers. Whether it's one game that always stands out, like you could go if you're staying with the Michigan Ohio State rivalry, you could look at the 95 game. But another example that stands out is when Ole Miss upset Florida in 2008. If you look at Florida in 2008, people will be like, should they have lost to Ole Miss? No, but you look at Ole Miss, they had Aldon Smith. They had true difference makers, NFL difference makers, and that's what it can take when an upset happens. And a lot of times when you see upsets happen, it's to like Michigan, like their losses are to, like the Oregon game was a bad loss, but also like their losses are to Illinois, who's a good team, and it was close. Their losses to Indiana, who's undefeated, and that was close. So you look at like Michigan's lot, like you look at teams when they upset a team that's like, yes, they have usually multiple losses. Yes, they've underachieved. Yes, they maybe had some injuries. All these things kind of ingredients of Michigan football, but they've also had true NFL difference makers, and they also were just good, rock solid football teams that on a given day or that given day could do it. So I think Michigan has a chance against Ohio State. I think they do beat Northwestern. I don't know if they beat them by 14 points they're favored by. I don't know if they beat them by 14, but I do think they beat Northwestern. And I think they go into I think it'll be one of those games where I don't know how the media is going to. I think it'll be one of those games where you will hear people say Ohio State's going to win, but I don't think, and I think you will hear a lot of people say Ohio State's going to beat Michigan handily, but I don't think you will hear, I think you'll hear more people say Ohio State's just going to win without them saying that they're going to beat them handily. I think there will be people saying they're going to beat them handily, but I think there'll be a lot less people confident, I should say, that Ohio State will beat Michigan. So I think Michigan could beat Ohio State. Obviously, my point is, with true difference makers, you could do it. And the current state of Michigan football, 5-5, 10th in the Big Ten. And so I think they'll beat Northwestern, and I think they have a chance to compete against Ohio State. And I think they can. I'll say right here, I think they can beat Ohio State. I think I'll say definitively, I think they will compete. We'll just see if they can get it done in. That's a game that's intriguing just because Michigan has won. It'll be very intriguing for a few reasons. I'll point those out right here. So number one, Michigan comes into this game. They've won 3 straight against Ohio State. And Michigan has really made the emphasis to making Ohio State their Super Bowl. So, but this is a year where Michigan still, like I said, I keep repeating, Michigan still has talent, NFL difference makers. Not even that, just guys that have been on the team that have beat Ohio State. So, and Ohio State comes into the game where they should not even that they will be favorites, they should win the game. And Ryan Day has not beat Michigan in several years. So, it's a game where you don't want to. I don't necessarily say. I don't know if I'd say there's a ton of pressure on Ohio State, but there definitely is pressure on Ohio State to win this game. You could argue last year there was more pressure on Michigan to win the game since it was at home. Michigan, there was just a lot going on. So pressure on Ohio State, Michigan, with kind of like this. Not only can they treat it as their Super Bowl because it's their biggest rival, but they can treat it like the Super Bowl just because Michigan, they are not going to compete for a national championship and in a playoff. So yeah, there's a lot of things that will make this matchup intriguing. So I want to wrap at that, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Stay tuned for more from Big Time from the Brant Marshall Show. Excuse me.